Hi, it looks like we have a pretty good group logged in, so I'm going to get us started. First, I want to welcome and thank each of you for joining us on today's capability webinar, Doing Business in Canada. My name is Crystal Dahl, and I am the Online Communications Specialist here at Meritas. Today's webinar will be presented by the main member contact at our Halifax, Nova Scotia Meritas affiliate, Michael Kennedy. Michael has been practicing law for more than 30 years. He has participated in mergers and acquisitions, leasing, financings, share purchase agreements, sale leasebacks, and P3 transactions, varied commercial transactions, and various real estate developments. This transaction-based practice has provided invaluable experience in all manners of commercial law and application of various legal structures to emerging business enterprises. Examples including P3 school and institutional developments for the government and the private sector, construction, financing, leasing, and sales of large commercial, industrial, and retail complexes, represented local utilities in the acquisition and development of wind power and biomass facilities. And most recently, Michael has been active in certain aspects of Aboriginal law associated with resource and treaty rights and the duty to consult. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. As many of you have likely already noticed, all of your telephone lines have been muted. If you have a question for Michael, you are welcome to ask via the chat feature. This is found on the left-hand side of your screen. Michael is planning to answer all questions at the end of his presentation. If you experience any technical difficulties, please press *0 on your phone at any time to connect with a support technician. With that, Michael, are you ready to get started?
Yes, I am, Crystal. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I first of all want to go over the purpose of the webinar, and that's to assist lawyers from outside of Canada with guiding their clients into the Canadian marketplace, to increase understanding of the legal and business frameworks within Canada, and to demonstrate how Meritas is a very effective tool in delivery of legal services to clients throughout Canada. Without further ado, I will now go on to the next slide, which is the map of Canada. Now, the intention of showing you the map this way is to explain that people from outside of Canada look at it as a uniform country. You'll note that there are lines within this. This is the division of the provinces. For the U.S. participants in this, they most likely will understand that these provincial boundaries are much like their state boundaries in the sense that there are different legal regimes within it. However, for the purposes of this introduction, I'll just show you the map. And I will show you where I am speaking from, which is Halifax, Nova Scotia, on the east coast of Canada. Canada stretches for 4.5 time zones, and different rules again apply in the different provinces, and I will now go on to some facts about Canada, just so you'll get an idea of the size and scope of Canada. So Canada is the second largest country in the world, and it has the longest coastline of any country in the world when you include all of the islands, particularly up north. I've just shown here the population of Canada, which is in excess of 35 million. And if you think about this in perspective, it's 1/10 of the population of the U.S. And I also have a slide here that shows the GDP over the years. And you will note that, like everyone else in the world, we had problems in late 2009, early 2010. Okay, now, Canada is a federal state, a parliamentary democracy, and a constitutional monarchy. Well, I'm not from a political science background, and I'm not sure about the implications of all of this, but I can say that we began in 1867, and what happened was 4 provinces got together and created Canada as we now know it. And it was Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario, which formed the four provinces which created Confederation. Now, it slowly moved west with each of the provinces joining Confederation later, and then the last province to join Confederation was Newfoundland. In the north, we have 3 territories of Canada which have, they're not quite provincial jurisdictions, but they do have certain legislative rights. So Canada was started in 1867 with the British North America Act. Now, that created essentially federal and provincial legislatures, or federal parliament and provincial legislatures. And these legislative bodies were essentially modeled after the UK. The BNA Act also created courts, systems for education, elections, and governance. The most important thing from our perspective is that it created a division of powers between the provinces and the federal government. Now, U.S. participants will recognize that the division of powers is quite similar to the division of powers which the U.S. has. Things like defense, navigation and shipping, seacoast, currency and coinage, they're all federal. Now, banking is federal in Canada, and what that allows for is the creation of our chartered banks. And the other aspects, though, of banking, for instance, when they're obtaining security of various forms like mortgages and personal property security and so on, those types of things are actually dealt with at the provincial level, and they're regulated at the provincial level. Different from the U.S., criminal law is federal in Canada, and of course, federal is income tax, but please note that also income tax is dealt with at the provincial level. Immigration is federal. Foreign investment is federal. For those coming to Canada from the outside, immigration and foreign investment are very important, particularly from the business perspective, and they are federal jurisdictions. And anything that's not specifically given to the provinces under the BNA Act vests with the federal government. Now, this is the list of the provincial powers, and of note within the provincial powers that are listed are sales tax, property tax, and, as I mentioned before, income tax. The incorporation of companies with provincial objects we'll talk about later, but that is a provincial jurisdiction. The broad one here, take note of, is property and civil rights in the province. So any property within the province and basically civil rights within the province are all dictated by provincial legislatures and the common law in the provinces. Down further, we have exploration for non-renewable natural resources, and this is important for businesses coming to Canada because natural resources, not in all cases, but in most cases, are dictated by provincial governments. The development, conservation, and management of non-renewable natural resources and forestry, generation and production of electricity, and labor and employment for organizations not solely operating in the federal area. These are all provincial powers, and as we'll get into in a minute, these powers and these laws are different throughout the provinces. Okay, what happened was when each province joined Confederation, including the 3 of the original 4, the common law of England was adopted by those provinces, and when the common law was adopted, it was adopted as it existed in England at that time. Now, when Quebec joined Confederation, Quebec already had their own civil code, which was passed in 1866, 1 year before the British North America Act. This is loosely based upon the Napoleonic Code of 1804, and the Quebec Civil Code is in existence today. Again, in comparison to the U.S., this would be similar to Louisiana. Now, this code does not apply to federal powers within Quebec. That is dealt with through the law of the federal laws. Now, of note here is that the common law was adopted at a different time in each province. In addition to that, it has diverged between the provinces over time to the point where the common law is not the same in every province. In addition to that, each provincial legislature has passed laws in provincial areas, and these, in some respects, may be similar, but clearly, in all respects, are not. Therefore, there is a large distinction between the laws that apply in the various provinces. Now, of particular importance to lawyers is this. Lawyers are licensed in each province. Consequently, what happens is I am licensed to practice in the province of Nova Scotia. I am not licensed to practice in any other province in Canada. So each province licenses the lawyers to practice in the individual areas. Clearly, this is because the laws are so different in each of the jurisdictions. The other issue of note here is that the conflict of laws, which you'd be familiar with respect to different countries and so on, applies between the provinces within Canada, so that you get into these similar arguments in litigation cases about where the litigation should be initiated. Okay, now, what we have next is we have the real view of Canada, which is the different colors of the provinces, because it's not a uniform jurisdiction whatsoever, and each of the provinces is outlined here in a different color. So we start with Nova Scotia in pink on the right, and again, Confederation moved west. The three territories are outlined up above, and Newfoundland and Labrador, being the far eastern province, is on the right. Okay, now, just from a size perspective, so that we can see how big Canada is. Canada's largest province is Quebec. And it's, I've listed some of the facts that I found out here yesterday, and it's 37.3 times larger than Switzerland. That's just Quebec. And the unfortunate news, I guess, for those Texans who may be listening, is that our largest province is 2.2 times larger than Texas. And our largest province is Mexico is only 1/3 larger than our largest province. Now, as far as we are, because of the vast size, we are extremely rich in natural resources. However, we do have large urban developments. For instance, Toronto is the 3rd largest urban area in Canada and the U.S. Okay, without further ado, let's move along to, you have a client that wants to come to Canada. Well, how should you, as their lawyer, advise them on how to enter Canada? Well, I guess we can look at it, first of all, from the entry issues. And you may have employment issues with respect to immigration, and you may also have just straight immigration issues that you're faced with. Again, those are federal areas and can be covered in any province in Canada. Now, if your client wants to move their offices or create an office in Canada, they have two choices, really. One is to create a branch office in Canada of their existing entity from outside of Canada, and the other is to create their own entity within Canada. So let's talk about both those options. The first option is the branch office. So what you would do is you would register your client's business to carry on business in every province where they intend to carry on business in Canada. Because if you go back to the division of powers, each province dictates the registration and the conduct of business within the province. So each province has a requirement for registration to do business in their jurisdiction. So the foreign entity would register to carry on business, for instance, in Quebec and or in Manitoba, and if they decided to move their business as well to Saskatchewan, then they would add Saskatchewan to the list of provinces in which they register to carry on business. Now, one thing of note here is that the choice for a branch office may be dictated mostly by tax, because there are different tax regimes in place in this country, and particularly in their application to the type of business. So in other words, if it's a foreign business, taxation will be different for that entity than an entity which is created within the country. The other option, of course, is to create your own entity according to Canadian law. Canadian law recognizes most of the types of entities that you will understand which can be created to carry on business in this country. Again, most of these issues are dealt with on the provincial level, and I've just listed 3 here of note. For instance, there's no problem with creating a joint venture agreement with a local company, and that would be negotiated much the same as you would negotiate a joint venture arrangement with any company. Partnerships, we have limited partnerships and general partnerships which can be created here through partnership agreements. And the other option is to incorporate a company. And we'll talk about this incorporation business for a minute now. Okay, so the first thing you have to decide if you're going to incorporate is where. Now, you can create a corporation in any one of the provinces under their specific legislation. You can also create a federally incorporated company under Canada's legislation with respect to incorporations. There are specific advantages to each of these and even between the provinces. So the first thing I would recommend that you recognize is this. You have to know that there are choices, and you have to know that there are specific benefits which may accrue to your client based on the jurisdiction in which you incorporate. For instance, there are different tax regimes within each province, and how the taxation is dealt with will be very important for your client. The name that is to be chosen has to be improved in any incorporating jurisdiction. The benefit to incorporating federally is you get your name protected across the country according to their system. There are also residency requirements in the different jurisdictions. Some provinces do not require resident directors. That may be a benefit to your specific clients, and your clients should be advised of this when they choose to shop for the jurisdiction in which they're going to incorporate. Now, some of the provinces as well have these creatures that we refer to as unlimited liability corporations. Particularly for the U.S., there are advantages for incorporating in a ULC jurisdiction. It creates what's known in the U.S. as a see-through or check-the-box corporation in Canada for U.S. tax purposes. In other words, it's just an arm of the existing U.S. entity. Now, again, choose your jurisdiction wisely with respect to the ULC incorporation. Some ULC jurisdictions have different rules than others, clearly, and also some ULC jurisdictions have no residency requirement for directors. So there are different issues even associated with the ULCs. On top of that, there are different forms of corporations in each province, and there's different advantages and the like associated with incorporation in each of the provinces. Now, no matter what you do, you will be required to register your company in whatever provincial jurisdictions you're carrying on business. If you don't, you may be faced with fines, or in addition to that, you may be faced with issues associated with your inability to commence legal proceedings, or indeed you may not be able to be licensed for the particular business within the province unless you're registered to carry on business within that province. Okay, as far as litigation is concerned, each province and territory have their own court systems and they have their own rules. So there's different levels and districts of courts and areas of concentration for particular courts in each of the provinces. So again, each province has its own set of rules and regulations associated with litigation. There is a federal court system, much similar to the U.S., that deals with federal powers. So you can apply to the federal court in any of the provinces, and there's a federal court of appeal as well. And then all appeals from courts in the provinces and the federal court of appeal go to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada has refused to hear any issues that it deems not to be of national importance. Okay, now we come to Meritas. All right. You probably are aware that there are certain firms in Canada that refer to themselves as, quote, national firms. Unfortunately, these don't exist, and they are a misnomer. There are no so-called national firms that are represented in each of the provinces and territories within this country. They may, for instance, have a presence in 4 of the provinces, but not everywhere. Meritas has 12 member firms that cover the country. And they cover the country in the sense that they cover every jurisdiction within the country, and there's over 500 lawyers within the Meritas organization in Canada, which is a large number of lawyers that collectively act together. So there are substantial benefits for the Meritas organization in Canada for those from outside seeking assistance in Canada. So one of the things that we do in Canada is we keep in constant contact. There's only 12 firms, so it's easy for us to do that. We have monthly conference calls, and we meet once, usually twice a year, collectively, and discuss issues. So one of the things that we do discuss is we discuss what our respective strengths are, and how we can improve the referral business between the firms for businesses that are going between the provinces. And because of that knowledge, and because of our close contact, we are a really good first contact for those coming in from outside. Now, I asked the firms in Canada to give me a list of the specific areas which they wanted identified as areas of expertise within the individual firms within Meritas. And what has happened is I have produced this list, which is quite long, and I agree with that. And there's some things I want to point out to you, though. Because we have 500 lawyers, we have pockets of expertise throughout the country in most areas, including these areas here. So these areas are not meant to be exclusive. So if you take a look at the list, we have immigration covered, we have foreign worker entry covered, we have mergers and acquisitions, environmental law, and leasing. And let's just take a look at this leasing issue for a minute. If you are a U.S. national retail company and you want to come to Canada, you're going to want to have presence in each of the provinces. Meritas can give you leasing advice, which is top-notch leasing advice, in every province in Canada. And so that is a real benefit to those calling from the outside because we have Canada covered. Secured and unsecured lending. Now, in a lot of cases what happens is one of our firms gets retained by a foreign bank to put security on with respect to various businesses. Well, what we can do is one call to Meritas covers the security issues which are required in each of the different provincial jurisdictions. Again, a real advantage to the Meritas group. Resource development, maritime law, securities law, patents, trademarks, and intellectual property, and of course, at the very bottom on the right, we have taxation. We have excellent taxation advice throughout this country available to anyone who chooses to contact the Meritas firms. Okay, Canada is a collection of 10 provinces and 3 territories. They all have their own laws. Now, to plan an advantageous entry into Canada, foreign entities need to consider all possible aspects of conducting business in Canada. These include the type of corporation or entity which will be conducting the business. Clearly, taxation is an issue which must be considered. The advantages which accrue to the foreign parent, again, we're back to this ULC issue, residency requirements for directors, the type of business to be conducted, and where and in how many jurisdictions the business will be conducted. Meritas is licensed to practice in all of the provinces and territories in Canada. With Meritas, we have Canada covered. Here is a list of the various member firms of Meritas in Canada. And I see that there are no questions which appear on the chat section of this, so I will, without further ado, turn this over to Crystal.
Great job, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Before we sign off, I just wanted to mention that I will distribute a copy of his presentation, a recording of the webinar, as well as Michael's contact details. Please do not hesitate to reach out to him directly if you have any further questions. You are also welcome to contact any of the Meritas member contacts listed on this screen if you have questions more specific to their jurisdiction. And with that, thank you again for taking the time to join us, and I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.